Hey, how are you today? And on today's Inside Real Estate video, we're going to take a look at a rapidly evolving area of real estate in Massachusetts. It's around ADU. So if you don't know what ADU stands for, this is the video for you. If you want to hear about the updates that Massachusetts has recently made regarding the ADU law, then we are going to go into them at least on a surface level and talk about ADUs in general. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you don't know what an ADU is, it's an accessory dwelling unit, and these have gotten a lot of time in the press. Some of this is a function of the small house boom that we've sort of seen, the tiny house boom. But what an accessory dwelling unit is basically it's an apartment. So most people who have looked at housing in Massachusetts recognize that, like most areas of the country, we have zoning laws. And what that means is in areas where you have single family homes, there are just single family homes. You can't have an apartment on that particular property. But the ADU laws threaten to change that. And we'll talk about whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing or what the likely impacts are short term and maybe even a little bit long term. Try to think a little bit ahead because I'm not sure a lot of people are, but we'll take a look at that. But an accessory dwelling unit and for the rest of this video, I'm just going to call them standalone apartments because that's easier. And that's really what they are. They're standalone apartments. Um, typically they're around 900 square feet. They can be rented, right? It can turn single family zoning into two family zoning. Essentially, that's basically what it does. In today's video, we'll talk at first about the news that came out, and we'll talk a little bit more about the restrictions that are still in place, despite the fact that Massachusetts has moved the ball forward here. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about, whether or not this is a solution to the housing problem, or is it what kinds of other problems it's going to create. We're going to look at that too. So, some time ago, I want to say last year around this time, Massachusetts said that ADUs are legal. Now, if you think that that was super, super helpful, it was not. And the reason it's not is because building and zoning is primarily managed and developed by the towns themselves. It's not managed by the state. We don't have a statewide building code. We don't have statewide zoning. Now, there are sort of exceptions to this, right? Like Massachusetts has overrides, like um, 40B, right, is a classic zoning override that most people understand, and that's set at the state level. But at the end of the day, it still gives cities and towns a lot of options for how to work around the state law. ADUs are going to be no different. At the end of the day, your local town, your local municipality is going to decide what's legal around ADUs and what's not legal around ADUs. And so what happened this week is that Massachusetts came out and they said we have guidelines for how the towns might want to draft their ADU laws. And basically, they said these are things that you should probably have in your ADU law. These are things you should not have in your ADU law. And what's going to happen is all the towns are going to write new laws regarding the ADUs and new examples, new zoning parameters, and then they're going to submit them to the state, and the state will say yes, that complies with the law, or no, that does not comply with the law. But in the meantime, a lot of towns are going, they're just going to sit it out and wait to see what's legal and what's not legal. And all of this is probably still going to take quite a bit more time. Towns have ADU laws already. And I think one of the more interesting things about this is no one really knows what the state's going to do about pre-existing ADU laws. Are they going to say, well, they're okay because you wrote that before we wrote this? Are they going to say, well, you have to make changes because you're no longer in compliance with the state guidelines? Turns out nobody knows yet. And so again, in a lot of ways, this has gotten messier instead of cleaner. And right now, what I can tell you for sure is that just because you went to town A and they said, yes, you can do this and here are the requirements, don't assume that that means in town B you can do it. Okay. Right now, the towns are going to be all over the place with what they're doing. I suspect a lot of them are gonna, you know, try to tell you that right now they don't know enough information to approve anything like that. So if you've gone to a town to get something approved, you can't usually say, hey, I want to put this house on this lot. Can you tell me if I can do that? That's not really how it works. What you have to do is submit the entire plan, the entire engineered plan to the town. And at that point in time, they decide which part of the zoning piece that they have to look at, whether or not it makes sense from the town's perspective and the town's zoning and building guidelines. And then there's a whole bunch of other people that get to weigh in too, depending on the land. If it gets subdivided, then you got to talk to the neighbors, or if you need a variance, then there's a whole bunch of neighbor protocol, wetlands. There's all sorts of reasons why that process takes a long time. And ADUs are now going to add another level of complexity. So I know a lot of people are going to rush down to their town hall and they're going to say, can I do this? And the town is going to go, maybe. We don't have enough information to tell you yes or no. And then even if you submit it, they may turn around and say, the problem is we don't know what our law is going to be, and so we're not quite sure what to tell you here. I expect that there's just going to be a lot of confusion around this. I'm going to close this video with talking about whether or not ADUs are going to be a useful solution for solving the housing shortage that we have in Massachusetts. And on the surface, it seems to make sense, right? I mean, ultimately, this should create more housing stock, and that should make it if you increase the number of houses, that should help to stop the rise of home prices. I'm not really sure that we're ever going to see so many ADUs that it starts to push it in the other direction, but you get the idea, right? More housing stock should allow for more people to live in the state. But, there are obvious problems here as well that I don't think people are really thinking about. First of all, if I put an ADU on my property, my total property is now worth quite a bit more. So when I go to sell it, it isn't going to be less expensive. It's going to be more expensive because I have this ADU sitting on the property. For homes that go the ADU route, their properties are going to go up in value. I'm not going to get into how much or whether or not that means you should immediately put an ADU on your property. Building anything is very expensive. You should have a longer time horizon. You're going to have to figure out, just like every builder does, how to build these without spending too much relative to the rent that you're going to collect. There's a lot of stuff to think about here, okay? But again, it's just not as easy as adding more housing stock and then everything gets cheaper. I'm not sure that that's going to work as easily as people are telling you today that it might. The other problems that we're going to run into is this is going to bring a lot of people who are not experienced landlords, and I've got absolutely nothing against people going out there and doing this for the first time. But if you build an ADU, let's say it costs you $100,000. Okay, that's a reasonable cost ADU. And your plan is that you're going to collect, you know, $1,000 a month in rent. That's a good plan, right? Hopefully you can get $1,000 a month in rent. Well, what if you do it for a year and you don't like being a landlord? You know, what if the tenant stops paying you and now, your whole mortgage, your whole house is in jeopardy because you're not quite sure how to get rid of that tenant or how to get the tenant to pay. Or maybe the tenant has a right to stay because you're not a particularly good landlord. There are a lot of issues here, and I suspect that we're going to see a fair number of stories because most of the time when people buy multifamily housing, they either have some expertise or some desire that they're going to learn that particular segment of the market. And it's very learnable, right? Right? I don't think it's a huge deal, but I think that this is going to encourage a lot of people who are not really thinking about the difficulties and the risks that are involved in renting to someone who lives 10 feet from their door. So we'll see. So I also think that this ADU zoning is going to cause a lot of lawsuits. I mean, if you're in a single family neighborhood, you probably paid a premium to be in that single family neighborhood. And now all of a sudden, people have the right to turn it into a two-family neighborhood. I mean, change is, always going to come, right? But I think that a lot of neighbors are going to say, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that. And I think that there are going to be lawsuits, especially against the first people who try to do that. I mean, if you go from a single family neighborhood to a two-family neighborhood, there are price impacts for doing that. Okay. You are probably going to bring the price of your neighbor's property down a little bit, even though your property goes up. So, you know, it's again this law, which I think has a lot of good intentions behind it. I think there's still a lot of rope that needs to be pulled here before we really see, how are we going to do this without upsetting the whole apple cart? And I don't think any of the answers to those questions right now are known. So, in the short term, I think there are going to be a lot of lawyers that win because the amount of confusion that's out there, some promises that are going to be made. I think there's probably going to be quite a few people that try to build ADUs under the state law, which again is not that's not how it works. Okay, you need to go to your town and get a building permit before putting a structure on your land. Please do that. Please go to your town hall and get a building permit before putting another structure on your land. But I think that there's a lot of questions about how this ADU is actually going to work. And I would expect I mean, I think a lot of people don't even know that this is happening, and they're going to find out when their neighbor tries to put an accessory dwelling unit right next to their house. And then we'll see what happens. So, but I don't expect it to be a smooth transition. So I hope you found this overview helpful. If there are any other ADU updates that are useful and come this way, I will post them to this channel, and I hope to see you later. Thanks.